All right, everybody, welcome to the fourth meeting of the OWASP Top 10 for LLMs expert group. Can't believe we've had 4 of these already, but making tons of progress. Super excited that everybody could make it today. And I must say, just generally super pleased with all the engagement and activity on all the lists on the Slack over the past couple of weeks. It's been actually really the last 4 weeks have been pretty intense, and I'm impressed with how much effort everybody's putting into this. See ads walking around like downtown in the big city with his coffee there, which is awesome. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
So, hey, always just a quick reminder here on the goals, what we're trying to achieve here. And I think we are doing great with this, is build this first of its kind community of AI and LLM security experts, and really become this foundational document for other bodies, other standards out there that are working on how to safely and securely use AI, and become a guide point in the industry. And I got to say, with the attention that we've been getting, really even since we formed the group, but in particular since we released 0.5 a couple of weeks ago, I think we're well on our way there. And the other thing I do want to point out is we're going to drive a lot of discussions and push a lot of boundaries. And I've seen, even just in the past few days, a lot of passionate debate around how we should classify things, what we should call things, the very definition of what's a security concern and what's not. And we knew we were going to get into this from the very first, and I think we're into the middle of it. And I'm excited to be doing it. I think we are pushing a lot of boundaries, and here we go. So, hey, it seems like just yesterday that we were kicking this off on our first meeting back on the 31st of May. But we have gone through several sprints and are now in the middle of what we call phase 3. So we're just before what will be the publication of 0.9. I think we're largely there. We have a few more drafts that are coming in over the next couple days. Excited to see that, and we'll get into hopefully what will be the date for 0.9 publication and what will we be doing between 0.9 and 1.0, because I do have some particular asks I'm going to put out to the team to try and finalize this and get the broadest possible feedback we can from the group to make sure that this is great. All right, so activity, I looked on the Slack channel. I rounded up. I think we were at 339 people on the Slack channel, which is amazing. I will always go back and say it. I expected to find a dozen like-minded people who were interested in this, and I continuously floored by how much interest there is in it. I put on the slide last night that the 0.5 Blag announcement on LinkedIn got 8,000 views. I went and looked this morning. It's actually closer to 9,000, and it keeps getting reshared. It's been reshared 50 times, which is by far the most popular thing I've ever posted on social media of any sort. So it just tells you something about the interest out there in the market for what we're doing. In terms of activity, right, at one point it was all the project top 10 for LLMs list, and that continues to see activity. But for this sprint, we really started to break it up, and in particular, bringing on one channel per entry so that we could basically build these sub-teams who were dedicated to working on these entries, really tuning them up and really making sure that they're the best that they could be. And, when you look at it, we have from the teens to the 20s to even up to 30 people working on these entries, tuning them up. And that to me is super exciting. When I look back at the 0.1 list, that was a weekend project for one person. The 0.5 list, there was a lot of effort into that, but a lot of that was going broad and then narrowing back down. This is about going deep, and that's really what phase 3 is about. is bringing out every good idea that we have about these and really getting that down. We're not building a comprehensive threat model or anything like that. It's still a top 10 list, but I think we're really getting out a lot of great ideas, starting to get out good ideas around things like fix guidance, getting much more detailed there, which is outstanding. So at the end of phase 2, which was really just a couple of weeks ago, we went through multiple rounds of voting. I'm guessing everybody on here voted in one of those 2 phases at least. We initially put it out to the entire expert team, had people rate on several criteria using a Google survey link, got a lot of those back, and then used that to inform the core team, which did the rankings where they submitted ranked lists, and we used that to create the actual top 10 ordering. In the last 2 weeks, we've actually done some modification, which I think is great, there were really, I think, 4 different entries that there were some overlap between, and I wasn't too worried about that, but I think the expert teams on those did a great job of getting together. There were a number of in-person meetings, which I thought was exciting to see people self-organizing and doing that. As a result, there was a lot of cleanup between those 4, but more importantly, 2 of them decided to merge. And as a result, that left an empty slot at the bottom of the list. There was an entry that a lot of people were very passionate about and did get a lot of votes, which was around either model stealing or model theft. I think there were a couple different names for that bouncing around in different entries in phase 2. So we went ahead and promoted that. And the teams actually worked really, really quickly to pull those previous 2 entries together and create the first draft of one for 0.9 that I think we should have ready soon. Couple other things of note. I think the first thing that, or the thing that we showed for the first time last time, was the PDF layout of the list that Mike Finch had put together. I think it looks so good. It looks so professional. I think it's probably the prettiest thing OWASP has ever done. Mike has gone the next step, which is he's actually creating a more interactive HTML site. So we'll have both versions for final. We'll have the HTML site, which will be easy to navigate in a browser with hyperlinks and all that good stuff, as well as updating the PDF. So it's going to be exciting to see this, have both of those available. I suspect this will be really good for search engines and other things to help drive traffic to us. So again, big thanks to Mike for actually putting in a tremendous amount of effort and showing his good taste and design skills on this. So that brings us to phase 3 sprint 2, which we will target to start early next week. And that will be, fingers crossed, the last phase for the 1.0 version of the list. Hopefully we will get 0.9 out early in the week. I would like to get it out on Monday. Some of that'll depend on when we can get final entries in. There are a few people who are saying that they'll trickle in over the weekend, which is fine. The original deadline was the 15th. And then probably takes Mike at least 24 hours to get that loaded into things like the PDF template. But if we can get that out on Monday, I will also then be posting a survey to the entire team on the Slack, really seeking feedback on some key items about that list, targeting any things that we may have missed, areas where people see technical issues, things like that. So we won't be opening up the entire list again, but we will be looking for very directed feedback on each item, basically getting everybody's eyes on them and making sure that they're the best that they can be. After that, we'll be doing final cleanups and tweaks. We'll be looking to publish 1.0 right around the end of July, or more likely early August, just getting it all organized. don't know if Autumn is on today. I don't think I saw her, but Autumn, who's volunteered to be our PR lead, has actually been coordinating with PR leads at some of the companies that we work at. And some of the companies that signed up on the wiki to say they were supporters. So we're going to try and get various quotes and support, put that out and try to generate some press and interest about the list. I did mention on one of the channels, I actually got a reach out from a reporter. I didn't mention the publication, but it was actually Wired. If any of you think that's cool, I think it's cool. So they want to write about the list. So I'm meeting with the Wired editor on Monday. I'll let you all know how that goes. But really, again, targeting getting this done around the end of the month. And I think we've done a great job at staying on the original roadmap. We're going to make sure that this really lands cleanly and that we get a great version of this out. So then I want to transition a little bit to just teeing up what are we doing after 1.0, because if you go back to the goals was to build a durable community here, not just get out a 1.0 version of the list. So we are going to do PR, going to generate as much attention as we can. We're going to put out some calls for public commentary, and I'll be doing some work over the next couple of weeks to figure out exactly what are the forums that we're going to use for the public to give us feedback. We'll certainly invite people to keep joining the Slack channel, and I would love to have lots and lots of people on Slack with us. But I think we'll put up some additional forums as well where people can send us feedback on the list. And then the other thing that we'll start doing right after we publish 1.0 is building a process for V2. We all know the 1.0 process was a bit seat of the pants. We made it up as we went, but we said we were going to move fast and hopefully not break things too much. I think we've struck a good balance there. I would love V2 to be much more data-driven. And I think there's enough activity going on that we can do that. But we're going to have to figure out a process, and I'm going to be looking for volunteers to figure out how can we leverage lessons learned from some of the more mature top 10 lists and apply that to what we're doing, with the goal of, maybe doing a V2 rev 6 to 12 months out. And when we get volunteers who are interested in kind of crafting that and leading V2, we'll figure out the exact roadmap. Again, based on the commentary that we get, the feedback that we get from the public, and how much sort of data and diligence do we want to put into that process. So we will plan to have a meeting right around the publication of the 1.0. That'll be in about 2 weeks. I'll get that up on the wiki pretty soon. And with that, go ahead and open it up for discussion. So I'm going to hide the slides to make it easier for us to all see each other. All right, I do see that there is some commentary. Oh, Jason's got an interview coming up. That's very cool. But I'll open up the floor. We have a relatively small group today, and we've done well with even bigger groups. So you can either raise your hand and I'll call on you, or just take yourself off mute and feel free to comment.
I do. Oh, sorry.
All right, let's do Joshua first.
Yeah,
I saw him first.
So I'm just a little bit confused on the difference between sensitive data exposure and model theft. Does anyone have any insight on like how we can delineate those? Because I feel like in terms of talking about combining vulnerabilities, they seem very related. Kind of like a subset. That makes sense.
In my head, sensitive data is in the model, which is a different thing than my whole model can be downloaded.
Yeah,
Or
I think
a shadow model could be created through prompt injection. Which is,
oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I think model theft is more like you learning from, it's beyond even data leak, right? You learn the foundation model, what do they have, and you train your own model. You are a student, so you still, if you have access control, which is not implemented correctly, you can get the model like with a little bit of a cost, not as much as the cost of the foundation model. So that's maybe a slight difference. Yeah.
And actually, it's
Joshua,
I think, okay.
I
Joshua,
agree. So for model theft,
I'm not sure if you're familiar with Alpaca project, the open source LLM, and how they train the model prompting the chat GPT. So that would be a model theft, and you don't steal the whole model. You can actually generate tasks and outputs from the parts. So you can steal part of the model if you wish.
Which one is that, Jan?
Sorry?
So which one was that? Sorry,
Oh, it's Alpaca. I can share a white paper with you in the chat
Yeah,
in a
please
moment.
do.
I have a link somewhere.
And I
but
think,
by the way, sorry to interrupt you. Just a short comment on this. So I have to find the paper on this, but I believe that with LLMs, it's not so easy to steal a model as it was with other models due to size. And there was paper which clearly stated that if you prompting bigger model like GPT and try to teach your model, it can replicate the way it answers, but it fails with the reasoning and all other features which are like available for bigger models. So that's something that should be considered definitely.
I think, I think we need to distinguish the two. The data, the sensitive data disclosure is about PI data, it's about configuration, it's about things that we can accidentally can disclose. I think model theft is a more kind of elevated threat, if you like, because it allows you to use shadow models. It allows, it's kind of economic consequences, and I think the item highlights that. We also highlighted in that compared to the classic predictive models, this is early stages. Query-based extraction is not as easy as it is with CNNs and all the other models that you have. However, it's at the beginning, so we just highlighted that, and we said at this stage, and Adam did a great job there, and Manish, is that the focus is on monitoring, alerting, and auditing to see if there is any kind of activity. But this evolves very fast. So yeah, I'm very interested in the kind of in the paper that you mentioned. And also,
I just shared the link in there.
I think
I didn't understand your point of CNNs being easier to steal.
Yeah, if you look at for instance, if you use the adversarial robustness toolbox, it has already built-in methods where you can do functional extraction, you can do knockoff nets, all kind of papers that have demonstrated that, because the size of the model is actually quite small, so you can do the heuristics. If you look at the LLM, especially the foundational LLM, it's massive. Where I think we're going to see zero-day attacks and further research is, I can't remember who said that, is people will have the LLM anyway, so they will focus on the additional stuff which comes from the fine-tuning, which is much smaller problem space to solve. But we haven't seen I haven't seen anything concrete so far. I have seen a lot of research and demonstrations on the predictive models, but not on LLMs. So that's why I'm kind of interested to.
When I think about the difference between the sensitive data exposure and the model theft, it's really what the attacker is going after. For sensitive data exposure, like you said, it might be trying to trick the model into giving you people's credit card numbers and things like that. So it's trying to extract data, sensitive data. The model theft is really about stealing your IP. And if you've put a lot of time and expense into creating a data set, training your model, fine tuning, somebody could be coming after your intellectual property. And I think getting people thinking about both of those outcomes, and they can decide which of those they're concerned about. They may have said, hey, I did some fine tuning on this, but it's not the thing I'm most worried about. I'm worried about somebody trying to get the credit cards from the database attached to my LLM versus somebody trying to get the weights in my model because I've spent millions of dollars training this model and somebody would like to get that for cheap.
Yeah, also note that like model theft can lead to sensitive information disclosure, in that like if you download like a Paca 7 or Llama 7 gigabytes, it's like 13 gigabytes. So if you can stake the 13 gigabytes, you can probably remove some of the like validation inputs and outputs and just then get the sensitive information if you want.
And I just want to add to this, because we in the sensitive group we discussed the list is for developers. So if we explore other avenues, there's also insider threats that can do the model theft.
I personally, in my opinion, I feel like if I look at like the traditional OWASP top 10 for web applications, it caters the greater audience. And then you have things like the OWASP ASVS, which is directly dedicated to like developers as like this is how you build a web app as secure. That would be my opinion. Like, so I was going to bring this up because we've had like a lot of conversation. Sorry, I'm just at the bank. We've had a lot of conversations about like who it's related to, and it's come up in a lot of vulnerabilities. I think we need to make it very clear at a high level exactly who it's for. But I have to be honest, the OWASP top 10 was originally for developers, and now it's used by security advocates everywhere. You see like CISOs referring to it, all other kinds of people. So I feel like it's beneficial to have the top 10 as like a general, this is for all advocates of the industry and the space. This is why you should care. Like, this is what is going on in the industry. This is why you should care. And then you have things like the SKF, the ASVF, which is directly implemented at how to do a specific function if you're a specific role within the industry, if that makes sense. That's my opinion. And that makes it easier for us to generalize the top 10, because otherwise everyone's going backwards and forwards on what should be a top 10 because they're not clear on a consensus of who the target audience exactly is. But I think it should be all stakeholders of AI, of ML security.
I think it's an interesting point, something I also brought up in the Slack channel. There's like, if we need to expand the charter to include LLM developers and other audience as well, because so far it's for the adopters of LLM, the technical adopters. And I think it's something to consider, especially there's also like another type of audience, companies who are considering opening up access to ChatGPT and other applications of LLM, which may or may not be relevant here, right? So it's important to define the audience to a certain extent, and of course the ecosystem will make of it whatever it wants to.
I agree. I think what's going to happen with our top 10, based on what is happening with like top 10 for mobile apps and web applications, this top 10 is going to be inserted into like all security companies as a guideline. It's going to be quite a compliance initiative. It's going to be all that kind of thing. So I honestly generally think the best way for us to strategize this is at a more broad spectrum for just like every stakeholder.
Yeah, what I'd suggest is we are in the late stages here, and I think we have targeted developers, and I think that's kept us focused. I don't think we want to change the scope over the next week while we're basically in a release candidate status, open it up and add requirements. As a product manager, that's the most lethal thing you can do. That's how you create death marches in development, as you go changing the requirements at the last minute. I do think as we go into the post 1.0 phase, I think it's really fair for us to go back and examine who's the audience. Is there even more than one list? I think all of those things become open topics for us as we get a little more time and space and have the first one out there so that there's less kind of desperation in the market for people looking for guidance. Once we have the first thing out, we can look at additional things that we put into it or put around it.
Agreed. And I think, for now, what we have actually I think aligns very nicely with what Adam said there. Yes, it's targeted for developers, but it mentions cybersecurity professionals. And as cybersecurity professional, I don't want a narrow definition that focuses on the code that other people will write. If there is security risk around model theft, I want to know so that, I can avoid data breaches. So it's good to focus. We have the cybersecurity professionals. It gives us this leeway to experiment with version. And as you said, Steve, let's come back and say, hey, do we need to kind of calibrate this more?
I think just to add my 2 cents, I think what's going to help is like provide as clear definitions as possible for each of the top 10s, because in that way you leave less room for confusion. Because at the end of the day, for example, we talk about model theft, that if you properly define that it is intended to be related to like IP theft, somebody like me using an open source model, trying to fine tune it, trying to release their own version on top of it, that's if the company gets compromised and that model gets stolen, that is what it means model theft. That is what it means by model theft. Then I think those kind of definitions and explanations around each of the top 10s will at least be good enough for the version 1, and for the version 2 or for future versions, you can iterate on it to figure out if there are possibilities to create further divided lists and stuff like that.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, maybe we target this as like, so one of the questions I was going to ask is for V2, how do we receive information from the public and be like, this, like, the public have feedback, how do we channel that with performing like crowd control? And maybe part of V2, we're like, okay, we're open to like something for developers, something for security engineers, something for safety, something for privacy. Like maybe that is part of the V2 initiative, and then that we expand the information we have, and we subset that into different generalists or whatever, if that makes sense.
I think it does. And I think what I want to do, while a lot of you guys are finishing up your drafts the next couple of weeks and we're going into sort of production mode, I'm going to be experimenting some things. There are things like there's a feature on the GitHub site where we could open up a message board where people could post feedback. We could open up email aliases, feedback forms, things like that. So I'll be doing a little experimenting and sharing that on the lists to come up with maybe a couple things in addition to experts joining the group on the Slack channel. If people just want to send some feedback, we'll make some ways that we can do that. We can catalog it. I expect we'll probably get a lot in the first month, and then we'll kind of build a core team around V2, look at what all that feedback says, and start those discussions around what does it say about the direction of the project.
I think just one thing to add is that sorry, I'm kind of like late to the party, like I've not been able to kind of join previous meetings.
Welcome aboard.
Happy to be on board. One thing that I would like to mention is like when it comes to LLMs, all LLMs are not generative. There are 2 types of LLMs, the discriminative and generative. So just keep that in mind when you're writing the drafts. That will also kind of like dictate a lot of definition.
I guess
say a little bit more about the difference just for education purposes.
Yes, absolutely. So discriminative models are essentially their intended purpose is to do classification and ranking. So things like, for example, you have 2 sets of inputs and you want to kind of like bucket them into different categories. You're like, okay, this particular occurrence or this particular type of input belongs to, say, IT domain or finance domain, XYZ domain. That's like classification. And then ranking is like basically, okay, this output is more relevant to the input. So that's the ranking piece. And then the generative piece is content generation, summarization, those kind of things.
Wait, bro, Well, are you just using,
So-
I heard different terms used, so I just want to make sure, are you talking about different like encoder only models versus decoder only models? So like ChatGPT is a
Correct,
decoder only
yes.
model, but you're the
Yes.
encoder, yeah, okay, so you're using discriminator
So
or encoder models.
ChatGPT is not
Perfect.
just
Okay.
decoder only. I think ChatGPT is encoder and decoder both. BERT is a great example for just an encoder only model.
A decoder only. Most of the GPTs are just decoder only.
Right.
The-
Yeah. GPT is a
the-
decoder
yeah.
only.
Yeah.
Yep.
Alex
and
is correct. So
Cool,
yeah,
I
I
just wanted to
confused
clarify.
when Lau said it's GPT is
Yeah.
both like this. GPT is not
That's-
really discriminated encoder only,
That-
decoder.
That's
only.
fine. That's fine. Happy to stand corrected. Not a big deal.
Yeah.
GPT is fine,
It's
decoder only, but then
clarification.
BERT is a great example for encoder only model.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Cool.
Yeah, so the encoder models are good for classification because what they do is they take your unstructured input like text and then just converts it to a latent space, and you could use that latent space to be like, hey, fraud looks like this or not fraud looks like this. Versus the generative / decoder ones are like, hey, let's just keep feeding back new input and let's try to predict the next character. So they're kind of sequential
Yeah.
in that nature.
So sorry, yeah. I think the original question by Joshua was the difference between the data leak, sensitive data leak, and the model set. I think we just spend too much, right? I maybe bring back a little bit. I think model theft and the data leak, the target is different. That's correct, and the defense mechanism is also different. And also with model theft, actually we have a more audience, so which is good, right? It's what as Donson has said, we need to cover more people. And also I propose we focus on what we have now as just version 1, and we can talk more about version 2 in the future. So for now, it's more like we really need to look at each individual entry to see, like everyone can comment, right? We can fine tuning it to make it really 1.0. I think that's maybe the target. Then we can maybe ask other questions. Like I'm currently like working on the kind of DOS attack on the LLM, because you have the context window and the hacker can manipulate it, right? I write some entry. I really hope some people can take a look, see if there's any modification we need to make, then we can fine tune it. Yeah. Thanks.
Very
Ken,
cool.
if I may add to your response, I think that data leakage is different from data model replication or through transfer learning. And the reason is that for the developer perspective, they understand the information leakage because you see all this. Can you generate? Can you write me a Lula baby with 10 Windows Pro keys? And it's understandable, but I think from developers' perspective, you don't know that actually the whole model can be extracted or parts of the model can be constructed, so reconstructed. So I can imagine a developer using LangChain, so he would upload 10 PDFs from company resources, use ChatGPT API, GPT-4 API to that, give unlimited access for paid tokens, and somebody would just extract this piece of model. So currently, I don't see that information in the brainstorm document. So that's just my 2 cents. Probably something we just would like, not necessarily give a mitigation strategy, because I don't know whether there is one, but maybe just pointing that out, that actually parts of your heuristics can be stolen.
Yes, so Jane, I think you mentioned like if you're using vector database, LangChain can basically orchestrate API calls, even using plugin, and also using the embedding API from OpenAI and insert in Pinecone or Chroma as a vector database. Then how do you protect this database, right? That's maybe developer is more interested.
And we have
That's different. Is that what you
no,
mean?
the point is that if you consider you're a developer, you build something like that, you may not be aware that without any, because you can extract the model without doing anything harmful. You don't have to do anything like smart queries or prompt injecting, anything like that. You just do what the Alpaca guys did, which is you generate. You can basically using for loop and regular interaction with your model. You can extract the underlying knowledge from it.
Yeah, Alpaca, what they do is called a syntactic data. They're using the data from the big model and train their own model, right? So they can save the cost. But it's not in terms of reasoning capability, it's not as much powerful as GPT. I think we're talking about different thing, but the model theft, in terms of the original question by Joshua, is model theft is a really different target, and also defense mechanism is different. I think for model theft is more like access control. If you are public model, like GPT, for its public model, everyone can try to train their own model based like Alpaca did, right?
Okay, so you don't consider that a model theft. You don't consider.
Hey guys.
Yeah.
I think we captured
We got a few people dominating the conversation and some polite people who are raising hands. So I'm going to call on a few of the hand people here. Kai.
Thanks. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, on the model theft, I'm really not so sure that it's a big threat. After all, it's mostly affecting the people deploying foundational models, especially in circumstances like OpenAI's APIs, regurgitating things, that, were within the bounds of the training data to some extent. It was shown that the autophagy, so training models on model-generated outputs, can give some advantages in producing smaller, more concise models. But they don't really memorize all of the details from the training data anyway. And are subpar. I don't want it to be a big threat, but I would actually like to talk a little bit more about prompt injection in a second, but I think that would derail if we're not done with that. So just let me know if we can come back to that thing that I want to present.
You know what, given how long we've talked about model theft, I think anybody else who wants to talk about that, go hit the model theft Slack channel. It's set up now. There is a draft in there. Let's go ahead. Kai, what do you want to bring up about the prompt injection piece?
Right. So just while you guys were talking, I made a very rough sketch. Unfortunately, I can't stream or anything. So maybe, Steve, you could maybe put it up for a second? I posted the link in the chat. It's just an image.
Yeah, I'm bringing it up. Okay, hold on. I'll share for you.
It's an insight that I had recently that I think might unify some of the confusion around threats stemming from LLMs and the categories that we have. So I split it up into 3 different stages that I've observed throughout the last half year, let's say, or year, around how people were engaging with the LLMs and viewing the threats. In the first stage, you have just the LLM itself producing hallucinations, maybe insulting the users, threats that were unintentionally arising from the way it was trained, the way maybe reinforcement learning didn't work. You have misinformation, bias, hallucinations, these types of threats that we also capture in the vulnerability category of over-reliance, right? I think that fits the first stage. And then what happened is people recognized, okay, the user can be an adversary, right? Manipulating the LLM intentionally and getting it to output things under its control. Now that can obviously lead to the LLM giving back, I don't know, a racist response or something, but that's at most a reputational harm. I don't think it's too big of a deal. After all, people can edit the pages anyway. So if they want to display something racist towards themselves, that's not that much of a big deal potentially. However, we've been integrating those with other APIs and tools, and then people have figured out, well, the LLM as an adversarial agent might be able to abuse those APIs, put in stuff into eval statements and so on. And so if we assume the LLM is benign the entire time while interacting with our APIs, that's unsafe, right? And this is a form of all the direct prompt injection, the user itself manipulating the language model. And the mitigation for that is pretty clear, right? You make the APIs robust, just like you would if the LLM was just the adversarial user themselves, right? It just extends that trust boundary. And then the third stage, which is what we did in February with the paper on indirect injections and try to show, is that there's a a third higher level of threat that's much worse, which is when the LLM is controlled or manipulated by another third party, right? And this is the indirect injection. The problem is if we only draw a boundary around our APIs and secure those, we're leaving the user exposed to that malicious language model that is sitting between them and all of the data and applications, right? So hardening these APIs is not sufficient, and the mitigations change drastically, and the entire threat model, you know, expands quite a bit depending on what the APIs can do. Because previously, obviously, the LLM was only capable of doing things the regular user would be able to do with those APIs, and that's generally fine unless those are insecure in a traditional sense. But now, even if the APIs are perfectly fine and safe and safely implemented, the interaction with the user through the malicious model, it can omit, manipulate information that goes either way, and obviously can perform actions that are not intended by the user, right? And this is capturing, I think, a few different things that we had. Things like insecure handling of LLM output, I think, might fall into the second stage. But prompt injection, we currently have that as one thing, when I still think it might be, you know, two very different threat models that require different approaches, right? And yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. I thought it might be help to unify those ideas a little bit.
I actually like your breakdown here a lot. And, you know, one of the things I've been thinking of that I'm going to work on over the next couple of weeks is putting together more of an intro for the whole thing. And maybe we can call out some of these distinctions in terms of the evolution of the threat space, and even just do that in the front matter a little bit to set it up. So I like this a lot. You should post this in the main channel as well, so we can all think about it.
I'll make a polished version of that. Then, you know, before that, probably don't share it.
Cool. Let's see. John has been really patient raising his hand for a while.
That's okay. I can speak a little, so that's fine. I think what this conversation also, and also the intense conversation, very, very enjoyable conversation on Slack highlighted, is that we also need to set the context, a standardized vocabulary of what those things are. So in addition to specifying who is the audience, I'd like, as you know, Vladimir, fantastic interjection there on people saying, oh, you know, plugins, and covering everything. And you, Vladimir, posted a very nice in the insecure plugin channel, so join that channel. I'm selling it, I'm promoting it now. He created a very nice diagram of what an architecture looks like. I think we should adopt and create something like that, that we use it so that everyone actually has, you know, the kind of the same terms of reference. And maybe we make it as after version 1, as part of version 2, or something as part of the collaterals that we have.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And
Vladimir?
Yeah, actually, I was raising the hand on the same topic. So thank you, Josh, for bringing it out. So if we have time, I'd like to speak a little bit about these plugins and the tools and the difference, because it's really might be confusing for consumers of our list, especially if we're talking about developers as consumers of the list. They might be less interested in the plugins and the all cool hacks which happens around the plugins, and they will be mostly interested in the threats which happens in the second scenario which Kai just shown. So let me share my screen and show the diagram. So can you see it?
Yep.
It's far imperfect. So disclaimer: I've intentionally omitted a lot of details and things. So it's not perfect. I recognize this. So but what it should show is the different application of the LLM and the different way we communicate with them. So the first big scenario is that when we communicate with chatbot, which is basically application on top of LLM like ChatGPT or whatever. It has nice UI. It allows us to integrate plugins and whatever. I'll touch base on the plugins in a second. And in a second, as a second option, we have a API interface to these large language models. I'm not speaking about open source models. Let's speak about like something big like Palm or OpenAI APIs. So we have this API interface, and it doesn't have any plugins, any fancy stuff. But we have all control in our application. So we basically define the prompt. We basically define how the prompt is parsed and what we do with this prompt, and if we should call any tool based on this or we should not, if we should go to embeddings to fetch some content or we should not, etc. So like LangChain provide us with this functionality. And this is two big different scenarios. And what I see in our discussions that we discuss a lot of these, but we do not discuss a lot of these. And this part is really crucial for enterprise developers, because if I'm a big enterprise, I want a cool support chat, I want a cool thing which will parse resume of my candidates, as was one of the examples, and I'll build it on my side within my application, and we'll use only API interface. So all plugins stuff won't be applicable in a clear way. So based on this diagram and the logic we have here, I suggest kind of a definition that LLM plugin is basically an API exposed by some service, consumed by a chatbot, and presented only as a manifest, which is submitted to LLM. When LLM tool is basically a piece of code which exposes external functionality to LLM agent, as it currently defined in the dictionary we have. So, and the main difference that with plugin we control only manifest. So basically description of our API and our API. When within the tool we control the whole flow. So how LLM will be prompt, how the tool will be called, and basically when our external tool will be called. That's basically the topic to discuss.
Great. Hey team, I'm going to get ready to wrap this up. Anybody have a final comment that they want to make before we wrap up for the day?
I would say there's I can't remember exactly what it's called on the wiki. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of on foot. I can't remember the individual that created it. In the wiki, we have a definitions page. Kudos to whoever built that. I think it's also an important effort for us as contributors to define everything in there, which we are referring to in the top 10.
Cool.
I'm just going to chime in. I've had my hand up for a bit, and I guess
go ahead.
You missed me. Yeah. I've had this is a question I want to toss out to everyone. While working on while working on prompt injection, I've noticed that we're putting example attack scenarios into common examples of vulnerability. If you look at the template for each section, it has a common examples of the vulnerability section and an example attack scenarios section. I'll pop the link into chat. I'm just curious if we could get a little bit more definition between those two, because I've noticed that the attacks being described in the vulnerability section, and there's a little bit of incoherence as to what each section means. So I'm not sure who's originally defined those two sections, but if we could get a little bit more clarity on what is expected or what the definition should be of the contents of each of those sections.
Yeah, I'd suggest if you go into the channel and maybe post some examples of what you think is on the wrong side of those boundaries, it'd probably be easy to look at that. I bet the team could clean it up. I think it's good to point out.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've done that. It's just that we haven't had much progress on that.
All right. Cool. All right. Hey, team. Again, I want to say thank you. It's been a whirlwind last 3 weeks, and we got another couple of weeks to go. This has been really amazing, and this team is awesome. I really appreciate everybody showing up in person today. But everybody out there, if you're watching the recording later, just so many contributions. It's really coming together wonderfully, and the feedback so far has been awesome. Really looking towards getting version 0.9 out next week, and then moving ahead towards 1.0. So I will get up the information soon on our next meeting, but think about it being in about 2 weeks. See y'all soon. Bye, everybody.
Cheers, guys. Have a good day.
Take care, y'all.